I went into surgery to have my appendix removed, but when I woke up, I felt strange. Something was wrong. The nurse who helped me change my clothes suddenly whispered, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he hadn't told you anything." I flinched and asked, "He said what?" She looked around nervously, pulled the curtain, and added in a barely audible voice, "Your husband signed a consent for another operation. An operation you never authorized." The pain came before consciousness. Dull, pulsating, it spread throughout my body, as if someone had poured molten metal inside me. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like they were glued shut. My mouth was dry, and a metallic taste settled on my tongue. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. "Mrs. Reed? Laurel? Can you hear me?" I finally managed to open my eyes. The bright light stabbed at my pupils, and I closed them again. When I tried a second time, I saw a woman's silhouette above me. It was a nurse. She was young, with kind eyes, and a ponytail of red hair that was escaping from under her cap. "Where am I?" My voice sounded like a rusty door creaking. "In the recovery room," she answered, checking the IV. "You're under anesthesia, but everything went well. How are you feeling?" I tried to assess my condition. The pain in my lower abdomen was worse than I expected. It was as if someone had been digging in there for much longer and deeper than they should have with a normal appendicitis. "It hurts," I whispered. "I didn't think it would be like this." The nurse, her name tag read Teresa Maynard, smiled a little nervously and added painkillers to the drip. "That's normal, considering both procedures. It will be easier soon." I tried to stand up on my elbows, but a sharp pain forced me back down on the pillow. "Both procedures?" I asked again. Teresa froze. "An appendectomy and—" She stopped talking and nervously glanced at the door. "I'm sorry, Dr. Renfield should have explained by now. I'll get him." "No," I grabbed her arm. "Tell me now. What did you do?" The nurse looked around and came closer. Her voice became quieter. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he hadn't told you anything." A chill ran down my spine. "Who didn't tell you?" "Didn't tell me what?" Teresa looked around nervously, pulled the curtain separating me from the other patients in the room, and leaned into my ear. "Your husband has signed a consent form for another operation," she said in a low voice. My fingers trembled. "What kind of surgery?" "Tubal ligation," Teresa exhaled, and I saw sincere compassion in her eyes. Time stopped. The nurse's words hung in the air like poisonous gas. I couldn't breathe. I could not move. Separate thoughts flashed in my head, but they didn't add up to a single picture. "It's impossible," I finally whispered. "Gareth couldn't. He knows I wanted another child. He couldn't." Teresa pressed her lips together. "I saw the papers, Laurel. He signed them last night when you were prepped for surgery. He said that you had discussed it together, that you had agreed to it because of the problems with your previous birth." Tears burned my eyes. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "This is a mistake. There has to be a mistake." "I'll get you some water," Teresa said, squeezing my hand gently, "and I'll find a doctor." She walked out, leaving me in a cocoon of shock and disbelief. I tried to remember the last conversation I had with Gareth before the surgery. He was concerned, but seemed so supportive. "You're going to make it, sweetheart." "It's a simple procedure." Was there something strange in his voice? Was there any tension in his voice? I tried to reach for my phone on the bedside table, but the pain made me cry out. At that moment, the curtain opened and Gareth entered the room. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. He was holding a bouquet of my favorite yellow tulips. "Hello, darling." He leaned down to kiss me on the forehead. I pulled away from him. "What did you do, Gareth?" His face froze. He slowly put the flowers down on the nightstand. "You already know. It wasn't a question." He knew I knew, and his eyes were a mixture of guilt and relief. "How could you?" My voice trembled with suppressed anger. "How dare you decide this for me?" Gareth sat on the edge of the bed and tried to take my hand, but I pulled it away. Laurel, listen, I know you're shocked right now, but I did this for you. For us. Do you remember what happened after Kara was born? You almost died. The doctor said that a third pregnancy could be fatal. It's my body! My voice broke into a scream, and a nurse from the next room came to check on me. You had no right to. I had the right to protect my wife. His voice was steel. I couldn't let you risk your life for another child. We already have 2 beautiful children. You lied to me. I felt tears streaming down my face. All these years, when I talked about a third child, you just put it off. And now you've decided for me? Gareth took a deep breath and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I knew you would never agree. You've always been a little irrational about children. Like after that miscarriage, remember? It took you months to recover. I couldn't bear to see you suffer. So you decided to make me suffer in a different way? I felt something inside me break. You had no right, Gareth. Laurel, please. His voice was pleading. Just think rationally. This is the best thing to do medically. Even your doctor agreed. My doctor? I couldn't believe my ears. Dr. Renfield agreed to perform the procedure without my consent? Gareth looked away. Technically, you don't need your signature if there's a medical reason and your next of kin agrees. I talked to him a week before the surgery. He agreed that the risks were too high for you. I felt a new wave of horror wash over me. A week? You planned this a week in advance? My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would jump out of my chest. Gareth sighed again. Laurel, it doesn't matter. Who else? I screamed so loudly that he flinched. My mother, he finally admitted. I consulted her. Of course you did. Veronica, the bossy mother-in-law who always thought she knew what was best for everyone, who believed that 2 grandchildren was just enough for her precious son. Come out. My voice turned icy. I don't want to see you. Laurel, you can't just. I grabbed the vase from the nightstand and threw it at the wall above his head. The glass shattered, the water splashed, and the yellow tulips scattered on the floor. A doctor and 2 nurses ran into the room. I was trembling all over, feeling the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Mrs. Reed, you need to calm down, the doctor said, giving Gareth a stern look. Mr. Reed, I think you should leave. Gareth looked at me one last time, a mixture of guilt and irritation in his eyes, and then left the room. When the door closed behind him, I turned to the doctor. You did this without my consent. My voice trembled with anger. You broke your oath. Dr. Renfield, an elderly man with graying temples and a confident look, did not look away. Mrs. Reed, I understand your outrage, but the decision was made on the basis of medical evidence, your last prenatal hemorrhage. I'm going to sue you, I interrupted him. You and this hospital. The doctor sighed and nodded to the nurses to clean up the glass shards. That's your right, he said calmly, but right now you need to rest. We will talk about this later. He added something to the IV, and I felt my eyelids grow heavy. Sleeping pills. They make me fall asleep so I don't cause problems. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me up was Teresa's compassionate face as she cleaned up the scattered yellow petals from the floor. When I woke up again, the room was dark. Only dim light came from the corridor through a crack in the door. Teresa was sitting on a chair by the bed, filling out some papers. What time is it? I wheezed. It's almost 2 a.m, the nurse whispered. How do you feel? Like I've been betrayed by everyone I trusted, I smiled bitterly. I'm really sorry, she said quietly. I wish I had known before. It's not your fault. I took a sip. The water was warm and tasted of plastic, but it still brought relief to my dry throat. Thank you for telling me the truth. We sat in silence for a while. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to comprehend what had happened. My body, my ability to have children, my future. Everything was stolen with one signature. Can this be fixed? I finally asked. There is a procedure called reverse sterilization, but it's not always successful, and it's another surgery. I nodded. Of course it is. Another surgery. He thought he was protecting me, I whispered, more to myself than to Teresa. All these years he's been deciding what's best for me. Where we're going to live, how to raise our children, when I could return to work after maternity leave. And I let him. I thought that's what marriage was all about. Compromises, concessions. Teresa was silent, giving me the opportunity to speak. But this! I closed my eyes, feeling the tears coming again. How can I ever trust him again after this? How can I go back to that house, knowing that my own husband thinks he can control my body? I felt her hand touch mine gently. You don't have to make a decision now, she said softly. Gather your strength, and then decide what to do next. I nodded, but deep down I already knew. Something was irrevocably broken. Between me and Gareth, between me and the life I had led, always giving in, always adapting, always being the one who says yes, even when I want to scream no. Gareth may have sterilized me so that I could no longer bear children, but he also did something else that he didn't expect. He awakened something in me that had been sleeping all these years, something that would no longer remain silent. In the darkness of the hospital room, with the sound of the drip and the distant voices of the nurses in the corridor, I felt a new strength being born inside me, a force that would no longer ask for permission to exist. I met Gareth 8 years ago at the annual Apple Festival in our town of Riverhill. It was a sunny day, and the air smelled like caramel apples and fresh-baked goods. I was selling braided bracelets at a charity fair for the local library. He walked up to my stall, tall, with fine features, and a smile that immediately made me feel butterflies in my stomach. How much is this one? He pointed to a simple braided bracelet with a blue bead in the middle. $5, I replied, trying not to stare at him. All proceeds go to the children's section of the library. I'll take 2, he said, holding out a bill. One for my mom. She likes blue things. Then he leaned over and added in a quieter voice. And if I buy a 3rd, would you like to have a lemonade with me when you're done with your shift? I was not prepared for such directness. Usually the guys at Riverhill were more shy. But there was something fascinating about his confidence. That's how our story began, with lemonade under the old apple trees and a conversation that lasted until sunset. Now, lying in my hospital bed, I remembered those first months with Gareth like a dream. He was so attentive, always knowing what I wanted, even when I wasn't sure. He took me to the best restaurants, gave me flowers for no reason, memorized little things from our conversations, and came back to them later to show me how closely he listened. But now, looking back, I saw the first signs. How he planned our dates without ever asking my opinion. I've made a reservation at Le Bistrot for 7 in the evening. Wear something nice, he would say. And I was thrilled that someone cared so much about me, not noticing that I hadn't even been asked if I wanted to go. When Gareth proposed, 10 months after we first met, I didn't even hesitate. He was down on one knee in the middle of the same apple orchard, where we'd been drinking lemonade, wearing a ring that must have cost 3 of my monthly librarian salaries. Laurel Mason, will you make me the happiest man in the world? He asked, and there was no doubt in his voice that I would say yes. And I did. Of course I did. Gareth was a good man. He was caring, successful. He knew what he wanted out of life. And I was always a little lost. My childhood wasn't bad, just quiet. My father worked as an accountant in an insurance company, and my mother taught elementary school. They loved me, but their lives were scheduled by the hour, and there was no room for spontaneity. When I wanted to join a theater group, my mother gently discouraged me. Laurel, you have no talent for acting. You should focus on math instead. When she dreamed of going to Europe for a year after school, her father shook his head. That's a waste of money and time. They were not angry or strict. They were just practical. And I got used to my desires and dreams being put aside as something unimportant. I learned to be quiet, obedient, someone who doesn't cause problems. So when Gareth came into my life with his confidence and determination, I was relieved. Finally, someone else can make decisions. Finally, I could just go with the flow. My first meeting with Veronica Reed was supposed to be a warning. It was Thanksgiving dinner, 3 months before our wedding. Veronica opened the door to her huge colonial-style home and hugged her son without even looking at me. "Gareth, at last!" she exclaimed, as if she hadn't seen him in years, even though they ate together every Sunday. "Oh, and this is your fiancé." Her eyes swept over me, assessing every detail, from my simple dress to my inexpensive necklace. "Come in, dear. I hope you're not a vegetarian. I made the best turkey in the neighborhood." Over dinner, Veronica asked me about my work at the library, my plans for the future, my family. Every word I said was met with a slight smile, behind which was an endless, "not good enough for my son." "The library is nice," she said, sipping her wine. "But of course, when you have kids, you'll quit your job. Gareth makes enough money at his law firm." I opened my mouth to say that I actually planned to keep working, but Gareth put his hand on mine under the table and squeezed it lightly, a signal not to argue. "Mom, we haven't talked about kids yet," he said softly. "We have all the time in the world." Of course," Veronica waved her hand. "But you know how much I'm looking forward to grandchildren. Your sister Shannon has already given me 3, and they're all boys. I hope you will continue the family tradition." After dinner, as we were driving home, I tried to discuss this with Gareth. "Your mom seems to have our whole life planned out," I said, trying to sound joking. "She's just worried," he replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "Veronica may seem intrusive, but she wants what's best for us." "But you don't think I should quit my job when we have kids, do you?" "Laurel, let's not argue about a hypothetical situation right now," he finally said. "When the time comes, we'll decide." This was typical Gareth, putting off difficult conversations, avoiding conflict, and typical me, letting him do it. Our wedding was exactly what Veronica wanted. 300 guests, most of whom I didn't know, exquisite floral arrangements, a string quartet. I dreamed of something simpler, maybe on the beach or in the garden. But Veronica said, "Honey, a wedding is not for you, it's for the guests." And Gareth agreed. I remember standing in front of the mirror in a dress that I didn't choose, with a hairstyle that Veronica's stylist suggested, and thinking, "This is your lucky day, Laurel. Don't be ungrateful." Elliot was born a year after the wedding. The labor was difficult, 20 hours, emergency epidural, and finally a cesarean section. But when they put this tiny bundle with a mop of dark hair on my chest, everything else stopped mattering. "He's beautiful," Gareth whispered, and for the first time in a long time, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes, a mixture of fear, admiration, and love. The first few months with Elliot were a blur of sleep deprivation, breastfeeding, and constant anxiety. Gareth returned to work after a week, leaving me with his mother, who had come to help. In reality, Veronica spent her days criticizing everything from the way I was holding the baby to the fact that I didn't have time to do the housework. "You have to let him cry, Laurel," she would say when I ran to Elliot after the first squeak. "Otherwise, he'll never learn to be independent." When Veronica finally left, I cried with relief. But her words stayed with me, as well as doubts about whether I was a good enough mother. Over time, we established a routine. I gave up my full-time job at the library and worked only a few hours a week running a children's reading group. Gareth was building a career and often stayed late at the office. Every Sunday, we had lunch at Veronica's, who never tired of reminding us how fast time was flying and how important it was that Elliot had brothers and sisters. The conversation about a second child began when Elliot turned 2. "Mom's right," he said one night, when we were putting Elliot to bed. "He needs a brother or sister. An only child grows up to be selfish." I hesitated, remembering my first pregnancy and childbirth. But seeing Elliot playing with other children in the park, I realized that I wanted to give him a family. In addition, part of me hoped that things would be different with the second child. Maybe this time Veronica would be less critical. Maybe Gareth would help more. Kyra was born on a hot August day, 3 years after Elliot. This time, everything went wrong from the start. Premature labor at 36 weeks, placental abruption, hemorrhage that almost cost me my life. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital fighting an infection, while Gareth and Veronica took care of the children at home. When I finally returned home, Veronica stayed with us for another month, and this time I was grateful to her. Weak and exhausted, I could barely take care of a newborn, let alone an energetic 3-year-old boy. One evening, when the children were finally asleep, I found Gareth in his office, looking over some documents. "I think we should hire a nanny," I said, sitting on the edge of his desk. "At least for a few hours a day. I need help when your mom leaves." Gareth took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "That's expensive, Laurel." "I can barely manage with 2, I said softly. "Elliot needs attention, and Kara doesn't sleep well at night. I'm exhausted." "It's only temporary," he waved me off. "It will get easier soon." I wanted to argue, but there was something final in his tone. And as usual, I backed down. The children grew up. Elliot went to school. Kara went to kindergarten. I went back to work part-time, feeling a strange combination of guilt and relief every time I crossed the threshold of the library. Home became my territory. I cooked, cleaned, organized the life of our little family. But somewhere deep inside, there was a feeling of incompleteness. When I looked at other mothers with 3 or 4 children in the park, something tightened in my heart. "You know, Elliot is 7 now, and Kyra is 4. I began cautiously one evening, when Gareth and I were alone. "I was thinking, maybe we should try again?" Gareth froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Again?" "A 3rd child." I tried to sound casual, though my heart was pounding like crazy. "We!" He put down his fork. "Laurel, you almost died giving birth to Kyra. The doctor said that another pregnancy could be dangerous." "That was 4 years ago," I argued, "and we can consult other doctors, find specialists." "No," his voice became sharp. "It's too risky. We already have 2 wonderful children. That's enough." "But—" I said no, Laurel. Gareth stood up from the table. "I'm not discussing this. My answer is final." He walked out of the kitchen, leaving me feeling like I'd been hit. Not because he didn't want another child. That was his right. But because of the way he dismissed my feelings, leaving no room for dialogue. I didn't bring up the topic again. At least not directly. But sometimes, when we saw the baby in the supermarket or on TV, I would catch Gareth's intense gaze. He knew I was still thinking about it. If I had known then where this would lead, maybe I would have been more persistent. Maybe I would have made him listen to me, really listen. Or maybe I would have accepted his decision and found a way to live with it. But I did what I've always done. I retreated. I swallowed my desires and focused on what I had. I remember last Christmas, when the kids were already asleep, and Gareth and I were sitting by the tree, finishing our wine. He suddenly said, "You're a great mom, Laurel. Elliot and Kyra are so happy. We did the right thing, didn't we?" I nodded and smiled, feeling the warmth of his rare praise spread through my chest. "Yes," I whispered. "We did the right thing." And in that moment, I almost believed it. The ride home from the hospital was quiet. Gareth tried to help me out of the car, but I pulled away from his hand. How could I let him touch me after what he had done? Elliot and Kara met me on the doorstep with homemade cards and homemade cookies. Their faces were radiant, unaware of the gulf that now stretched between their parents. "Mom, we missed you so much!" Kara wrapped her arms around my waist, and I barely contained a moan from the pain at the surgical site. "Careful, sweetheart," I said softly, stroking her head. "Mommy is still in a little pain." "I made you a drawing," Elliot said proudly, holding out a sheet of paper with a picture of our family. 4 figures holding hands under the bright sun. My heart clenched. 4 figures. Forever, only 4. The first days at home were the hardest. I slept in our bedroom, Gareth on the couch in the study. We hardly spoke, communicating only through short phrases about household chores and children. He tried several times to start a conversation, but I refused to listen to his excuses. I needed time to process what had happened. On the third day after my return, Nadine, my closest friend, came to see me. She brought me some soothing tea and her special chocolate muffins. Gareth had just dropped the kids off at school, and we were sitting in the kitchen. "How are you?" she asked, studying my face carefully. "I don't know," I answered honestly, twirling the cup in my hands. "Everything seems unreal." Nadine sighed and put her hand on mine. "Laurel, there's something I need to tell you." Her voice was quieter. "I didn't know if I should, but you have a right to know." Something in her tone made me tense. "Last month I saw Gareth at a coffee shop with Veronica," she began slowly. "They were sitting with a man, discussing legal documents. I heard them talking about operating agreement and legal rights of a husband. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to it, thinking it had to do with his work. The silence that followed was heavy. "He planned it," I whispered. "All of it." "I'm so sorry," Nadine said. "If I had known, I would have warned you." My daze suddenly turned to rage. Gareth hadn't just made an impulsive decision. He had calculated everything. He'd talked to his mother. He consulted a lawyer. Everything to take away my right to choose. When Gareth came home that evening, I was waiting for him in the kitchen. "Do you ever plan to talk to me properly?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of water. "You consulted a lawyer. It was not a request, but a statement. Before you signed the consent for my sterilization." He froze and then slowly set the glass down. "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter," I snapped. "Did you plan this in advance? With your mother?" Gareth sat down across from me and rubbed his face with his hands. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I wanted to make sure it was legal." "It was the right thing to do, Laurel. The doctor said, 'Don't you dare!'" I interrupted him sharply. "Don't you dare hide behind your concern for my health. You did it because you didn't want any more children. And instead of having an honest conversation about it, you decided for me." "We talked about it!" Gareth raised his voice. "How many times did I tell you that 2 kids was enough? But you wouldn't listen. You insisted on risking your life on a whim." "A whim!" I almost choked on my indignation. "A whim! Do you know what is not a whim? Respect for my body and my right to decide." Our argument escalated into the loudest quarrel in all the years of our marriage. We both screamed, releasing years of repressed resentment and unspoken grievances. And that's when Elliot appeared in the kitchen doorway, sleeping. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" His voice trembled with fear. We both fell silent, ashamed that we had woken our son. "It's okay, honey." I went over and hugged him. "Mom and Dad were just discussing adult things. I'm sorry we woke you up." I took him back to bed, soothed him, and stayed by his side until he fell asleep. When I came back, Gareth was sitting in the dark kitchen with a bottle of whiskey. "We need to decide what to tell the kids," he said. The next few days became a painful balancing act between trying to protect the children and dealing with our broken marriage. Elliot and Kara didn't understand why Dad slept in the study, and Mom often cried while locked in the bathroom. "Mommy, do you and Dad not love each other anymore?" Kara asked me one night as I was putting her to bed. "It's complicated, sweetie," I replied, trying to find words that a 7-year-old could understand. "And then it takes time to decide how to move on." "But you will make up." Tears shone in her eyes. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to lie, but the truth seemed too cruel. "We will both always love you and Elliot," I said instead. A week after I returned, I made an appointment with a lawyer, Mark Davison, whom Nadine had recommended. He listened carefully to my story, taking notes. "Legally, it's a complicated situation," he said when I finished. "Technically, in an emergency, a husband can consent to medical procedures. But what happened to you? It was planned. It was not an emergency. You could sue both the hospital and your husband." "But," I could hear the but in his voice. "But these cases are hard to win," he sighed. The court may decide that the doctors acted in accordance with medical evidence. It will be a tedious and expensive process with no guarantee of success. I nodded, feeling both disappointed and relieved. Part of me wanted justice, but the other part of me wasn't ready to go through a public trial where Gareth and I's most intimate issues would become public knowledge. "What about divorce?" I asked, saying out loud the word that had been on my mind for the past few days. "That's more realistic," the lawyer replied. "If you decide to go that route, we can start the process. But I advise you to consult a therapist first. Such decisions should not be made in a state of emotional turmoil." I took his advice and made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Amelia Chen, the next day. At the first session, I could barely speak through my tears. But with each visit, it got a little easier. "How do you feel when you think about what Gareth did?" Dr. Chen asked me at our third session. "Anger," I answered. "Betrayal. But also, shame." "Shame?" She raised an eyebrow. "Why shame?" "Because I let it happen," I whispered. "I always gave in. I always let him and his mother decide for me. My job, our home, raising our children. I just went with the flow." "Have you ever wondered why?" she asked me gently. And then I told her about my childhood, about my parents who never asked my opinion, about how I learned to be quiet and comfortable. "It's a pattern," Dr. Chen said, "a pattern that you can break if you want to." That evening, when I got home, I packed my things and moved them to the guest room. Gareth watched from the doorway, not trying to stop me. "Is this permanent?" he asked when I was done. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I need space, Gareth. Space to figure out who I am and what I want. Without you, without your mother, without everyone who has always decided for me." He nodded, and in his eyes I saw a mixture of guilt and fear. "I'll give you space," he said quietly before walking away. That night, lying in a strange bed, I felt a strange relief. Yes, my body had been mutilated without my consent. Yes, my marriage was on the brink of collapse. Yes, the road ahead was uncertain and frightening. But for the first time in years, I had made a choice on my own, and it felt like the first breath, after a long time underwater, spring, had come to Riverhill with new beginnings. Magnolias in bloom, the first tulips and daffodils breaking through the still chilly ground. I watched this rebirth from the window of the guest room that had become my refuge for the past weeks. Something about this cycle of nature, its insistence on blooming again and again after winter, gave me hope. Gareth and I existed in a strange truce, polite around the children, silent in private. He still slept in the study, I in the guest room. The children adapted to the new reality with that amazing flexibility that is unique to children. The most important thing for them was that we were both still there, that their world hadn't completely fallen apart. "I'm thinking of getting a job," I said one night at dinner. Gareth looked up from his plate. "Why?" "It's not about the money," I answered calmly. "I need something of my own. A space outside of the house and outside of all of this." He didn't say anything, but I could see his jaw tense. Once upon a time, this would have been enough for me to back down, to postpone my plans, to accept his silent disapproval. But not this time. The next day, I applied for a job at the bookstore, and 3 days later, I got the job. The owner, Helen Summers, was an energetic woman in her mid-50s, with short gray hair and sparkling eyes. "Books saved me after my divorce," she said, giving me a tour of the store. I didn't give her any details, but something in her eyes told me that she understood that I wasn't just here to make extra money. Working in the bookstore 3 times a week when the kids were at school was my salvation. The simple rhythm of unpacking new arrivals, arranging books on the shelves, talking to customers. All this brought me back to life, reminding me that the world exists outside the walls of our home. Through Helen, I learned about a support group for women who had experienced reproductive violence. At first, I was hesitant. Could what happened to me be called violence? "Laurel, when someone takes away your right to make choices about your own body, It is violence, she said, regardless of intent. The first meeting of the group was the hardest. I sat in a circle of strangers in the back room of a local community center, clutching a paper cup of tea, and listened to their stories. A wife whose husband punctured condoms to make her pregnant. A girl whose parents forced her to have an abortion. A woman whose partner secretly substituted her birth control pills with vitamins. When it was my turn, I thought I wouldn't be able to speak. I didn't even know it was possible, I finished my story, that someone could just take a part of you and all you can do is accept it. But you don't have to just accept it, said Rachel, the woman who led the group. You can choose how to respond, how to move on. With each visit to the group, with each day at work, I felt a part of me coming back. I began to renew old friendships that I had neglected during my marriage. I met up with Sharon, my best friend from college, whom I hadn't seen in almost 5 years. I called my cousin Myra, with whom I was close as a child. Gradually, I began to set boundaries, first in small ways. I said no when Veronica offered to come over and help with the kids, even though I had always agreed to her interference before. She refused to cook dinner for Gareth on her day off. She bought herself a new dress, even though he thought it was a waste. Each little no was both frightening and liberating. And with each no, I felt my inner strength grow. Gareth did not understand these changes. I could see the confusion and irritation in his eyes when I didn't behave the way he was used to. "Is it that bookstore that's affecting you?" he asked once when I refused to go to his mother's for Sunday lunch. "It's me, Gareth," I replied calmly. "Adapt." He snorted and left the room, slamming the door. That night at dinner, he announced to the kids that we would be going to Disney World for a week in the summer, without consulting me. "I can't take a vacation in August," I said later, after the kids were in bed. "I have an important project at the bookstore. We're planning a series of literary evenings." "Literary evenings?" He looked at me in disbelief. "It's more important than a family vacation?" "It's not about what's more important," I tried to speak calmly. "It's about the fact that you didn't ask me before promising the children. I thought you'd be happy." His voice became defensive. "We could all spend time together like we used to. Forget about all this." I looked at him and saw a man who really did not understand the depth of his actions. For him, it was just a fight that could be settled with a vacation to Disney World. "I can't just forget, Gareth," I said quietly. "You changed my body forever, without my permission." "There it is again." He rolled his eyes. "How many times are we going to go back to this? I realized you were upset." I apologized. "What more do you want from me?" Something inside me broke not with pain, but with realization. He really didn't understand. And maybe he never will. "I want you to realize what you did," I said, feeling my voice tremble. "Not just to me, but to our marriage. With the trust we had between us." "Oh, for God's sake!" He raised his voice. "I did it to protect you. Yes, maybe I should have consulted you first, but we both know you wouldn't have agreed, and that gave you the right to bypass my consent?" I also started to speak louder. "My body, Gareth! You're my wife!" He slammed his fist down on the table. "I had a right to take care of your health. I'm a person!" I was almost shouting now. "Not your property, not an extension of you, not a doll to be manipulated." We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen, looking at each other like strangers. All the years of living together, all the compromises and disagreements, all the repressed feelings exploded in that moment. "You know what I realized, Gareth?" My voice was quieter, but still firm. "This isn't just about sterilization. It's about our whole life together. About how you and your mother have always decided for me where we're going to live, when I'll go back to work, how many kids we're going to have." I took a deep breath. "I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to live like this." Gareth froze. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm considering a divorce." The words I had been afraid to even think for weeks finally came out. A series of emotions flashed across his face: shock, anger, fear, And finally, something like realization. You can't just, he stuttered, then tried again. We have children. We have a history. Yes, I nodded. And that's why I haven't left yet. But I can't pretend that everything is okay anymore. I can't pretend that this is just another fight that we'll get through if I keep quiet long enough and adapt. I turned away and went to the guest room, leaving him standing in the kitchen. I closed the door and leaned back against it, feeling tears streaming down my cheeks. But these were not tears of grief or even anger. They were tears of liberation. The word divorce was no longer just a scary ghost hiding in the dark corners of my mind. Now it was an opportunity, painful, difficult, but real. And the very thought of it, although frightening, also gave me a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. The smell of fresh coffee and sunlight flooding into the small but cozy kitchen was how my mornings began for the past year. Our apartment on the third floor of an old brick building in the center of River Hill could not match the size of the spacious house where Gareth and I lived, but it had its own special charm. High ceilings, large windows, wooden floors with barely noticeable scratches, the history of the previous residents that I didn't want to erase. "Mom, I can't find my blue sweater," Kyra's voice came from her room. "Look in the bottom drawer," I answered, pouring coffee into my favorite mug labeled Mrs. Event Manager. The children adapted to their new life easier than I expected. Of course, there were tears and questions, especially in the first months. But now, a year after Gareth and I officially divorced, they seem to have found their rhythm between the two homes. "Mom, I'll be late tonight." Elliot appeared in the kitchen, stuffing his textbooks into his backpack. At 9, he became more serious, more responsible. Sometimes it made my heart ache. Children shouldn't grow up so fast. "Orchestra rehearsal?" I clarified, handing him an avocado toast. "Yes, Mr. Benson wants us to prepare for the spring concert." Kara and I walked Elliot to the door and then got ready ourselves, she for school, I for work. Page by page, bookstore has changed my life. What started as a part-time job has turned into a career. 6 months ago, Helen offered me the position of head of the events department to organize readings, meetings with authors, and book clubs. I occupied a small office on the second floor with a window overlooking the city's central square. "Big day ahead!" Helen met me at the entrance, holding a cardboard box of new books in her hands. "Meredith Louise book signing is at 6, and we got confirmation from James Norton this morning for next month." I smiled as I accepted her coffee from a nearby coffee shop, our morning ritual. "I've already prepared everything for Meredith." And I sent an invitation to the local newspaper for an interview with Norton. The day flew by at the usual pace. Meetings, emails, preparations for the evening event. When the clock struck 4, I received a message from Gareth. "I'll pick up the kids at 5. I remind you that on Saturday is my mother's birthday. She invited you too. No pressure." I looked at the phone screen, feeling a smile touch my lips. Gareth had changed this year. Not dramatically. People rarely change completely. But he was trying. He started going to therapy shortly after we filed for divorce. At first, as he later admitted, it was just to prove to me that he wasn't a monster. But gradually, something started to change in him. "Thank you. The kids will be ready. As for my birthday, give Veronica my best wishes, but I have other plans for Saturday." These other plans included dinner with Dexter Clark, a local college literature professor whom I had met at one of our literary evenings 3 months ago. We met only a few times, slowly, cautiously. I wasn't ready for a serious relationship, and to be honest, I didn't know if I ever would be. But Dexter's company made it easy. He didn't put pressure, didn't expect, didn't try to control. At 5, I met Gareth and the kids at the entrance to the bookstore. He looked tired, but smiled when he saw me. "Hi, how was your week?" he asked as the kids looked at the new arrivals in the window. "Busy," I replied. "And you?" "Fine." The trial is dragging on, but the client is pleased with the progress. We talked about the kids, about school, about his last visit to the therapist. This was our new normal: polite, friendly co-parenting. It wasn't perfect, and it was tense at times, but we were trying for Elliot and Kara. "Mom, can I have this book?" Kyra ran up, holding a new graphic novel. "Of course, honey." "I'll pay for it," Gareth interjected, pulling out his wallet. Once upon a time, I would have argued, insisting that I could buy my daughter a book myself, but now I just nodded. It wasn't about money or control. It was his way of showing me he cared, and I could accept it. After the kids left with Gareth, I went back to preparing for the evening's event. Meredith Lewis had a full house, and the evening was a success. Returning home late in the evening, I felt tired, but also deeply satisfied. Weekends without children have always been a mixture of relief and emptiness for me. I used this time for my self-reading, going to yoga, meeting with my support group friends who have become an important part of my life. On Saturday night, Dexter took me to a small Italian restaurant on the outskirts of the city. He was an attentive, engaging conversationalist, and I found myself laughing more than I had in the past year. "You know, when we first met, I thought you were the saddest person in the room," he said as we shared dessert. "But today, you're glowing, Laurel." I didn't know what to say. Was I happy? Maybe not completely, but I was more myself than I had been in years. And it felt right. When Gareth dropped the kids off on Sunday night, he seemed tense. "Can we talk?" he asked as the kids ran off to unpack their things. We sat down at the kitchen table, and he pulled a small velvet box out of his pocket. "What is it?" I asked, feeling my whole body tense. "Open it," he said softly. Inside was an exquisite gold bracelet with a tiny book-shaped pendant. Elegant, expensive, exactly my type. "Gareth?" "It's not what you think," he said quickly. "It's just, I've been thinking a lot lately. About what happened, about what I've done." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I knew so well. "My therapist says I still don't fully realize the seriousness of my actions. That part of me still thinks I did it for your own good. But I'm trying to understand, Laurel. I really am." I stared at the bracelet in silence, not knowing what to say. "It's an apology," he continued, "not just for the surgery, but for all the years when I didn't listen to you, when I thought I knew better, when I let my mother interfere." I looked up and saw in his eyes a sincerity that would have once made me melt. Forgive everything, forget about my own needs in order to keep the peace. "Thank you," I said softly, closing the box and handing it back to him. "But I can't accept this." "Laurel, I told you I'm not trying to—" "I know," I interrupted him, "and I appreciate what you're saying, that you're trying to understand. But you can't fix it with a gift, no matter how expensive or beautiful." I took a deep breath, searching for words. "Do you know what I really need from you? Not gold, not an apology, but respect for my boundaries. Respect for me as a person, not just the mother of your children or your ex-wife." Gareth was silent, looking at the box in his hand. "I want us to build a healthy relationship as parents," I continued. "I want our children to see that we can split up and still respect each other. But for that, we need honesty and true understanding, not expensive gifts." "I understand," he finally said, "or at least I'm trying to." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Outside the window, the spring evening was slowly turning to night, the first stars appearing in the sky. "Kyra said you were seeing someone," Gareth suddenly said. I tensed, bracing myself for jealousy or reproach, but his tone was calm. "Yeah," I answered carefully. "His name is Dexter. He teaches literature." Gareth nodded. "Is he nice to you?" "Yeah." I couldn't help but smile slightly. "That's good." Gareth stood up, ready to leave. "You deserve to be kind, Laurel. You always have." After he left, I stood at the window, watching him get into his car and drive away. A year ago, I couldn't imagine myself here, in a small apartment, with a new job, with a new life. A year ago, I was broken, full of anger and fear. Was everything perfect now? Number. I still had days when I woke up feeling lost, not for Gareth or our marriage, but for an opportunity that had been taken from me, for a third child that would never be. But every day I became stronger. With every decision I made on my own, with every border I set and defended, I got to know myself more. The woman who was always inside me, waiting for the opportunity to come out into the light. I moved away from the window and went to check on the children. Elliot was reading, and Kara was putting away her treasures from her father. Is everything okay, Mom? Elliot asked, looking up from his book. I smiled, feeling myself fill with love for these little people who had gone through the storm with me and come out stronger. Yes, dear, I replied. And it was true. Not a perfect, complete, closed fairy tale, but the truth of a life that goes on. A life that I was now living on my own terms.